Farm Here Daily, a field forward podcast. I'm your host, David Geiger. Today on Farm Here Daily, we take a look at challenges in the supply chain during winter with Mike Steenhoek of the Soy Transportation Coalition. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, keeping folks informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Here Daily. And joining me on Farm Here Daily, we're going to take a look at the state of transportation this winter. To do so, we have with us Mike Steenhoek with the Soy Transportation Coalition. Mike, thank you so much for joining us on Farm Here Daily. And what are we looking at in this winter in terms of travel, any delays, any issues going on, or have we seen pretty solid movement so far?
Yeah, so far the movement's been pretty good. Rail service overall has been, pretty reliable. Not hearing widespread complaints about that. Of course, there's been a decrease in volume of soybeans being transported, particularly to the Pacific Northwest, which is very much a launching point for soybeans to the Chinese market and to other Asian markets. So any kind of retraction of exports to China, that's going to manifest itself in fewer rail movements to our port regions. So we're seeing that. We continue to have some challenges related to the Mississippi River. River levels are not as low as they were a month or so ago. We have had some precipitation that is fed into the system, so it's not as dire, but still, we're experiencing some low water issues there. Moving forward, one of the things that you always look at when it comes to both barge and rail is any kind of severe winter weather. And of course, intuitively we understand that if you've got significant amount of snowfall, ice accumulation, that's going to hamper the efficiency of rail transportation. You're going to have ice buildup on the rivers, so of course that's going to impede barge transportation. But one of the things that a lot of people don't fully understand is when you have severe cold temperatures, it really does impact service in the form of employee safety. So these employees who work on barges, who work on for the rail industry, there's often something very explicitly stipulated in these contracts, these union contracts, that when the temperature dips to a certain extent, there's a kind of a mandatory limit on how much these workers can be outside, obviously in the interest of safety. And then also, one of the consequences of low temperatures is the braking system for a train doesn't operate as optimally. It's an air brake system, and you have to have a certain pounds per square inch of pressure throughout the whole entire train. And so the longer that train is, you'll have, and when you have cold weather impacting that, it lowers the pounds per square inch pressure of that air braking system. So what you have to resort to is you have to lessen the length of those trains, and so you're having you know more locomotive power having to be devoted to transport a given amount of freight. So we'll often see winter weather really manifests itself that way as well when it comes to grain transportation and transportation in general.
I appreciate you bringing up the idea of winter weather affecting the people potentially more than the systems or the equipment technology that exists. To focus in on that, when you do look at the people behind our transportation infrastructure and supply chain, what is the key factor to watch out for when looking out for folks during the winter time and specifically in extreme cold?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you've got, severe cold weather, which limits the amount of time you can spend outside. But, you also think about barge transportation. Now, the portion of the inland waterway system that's really kind of north of Quincy, Illinois, so that's, throughout the entire area of where the Mississippi River runs along the state of Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, that's closed during this time of the year. But even when you get south of that Quincy, Illinois, which is kind of by Hannibal, Missouri, You can have cold weather that can all of a sudden result in ice accumulation on the top of these barges. And, there still are a number of locks that you have to go through. And so a lot of times, you'll have personnel that has to be on top of the barges and under, certainly slippery conditions. The Illinois River is a 365-day a year system. And so you can have obviously slippery conditions for that as well. And then also just the ability of workers being able to get dispatched to a particular location. Winter weather can really impede that as well. Of course, when you work in supply chains, when you work on when you work on a train or a barge, your office is mobile. You don't just go to an office and you are there for from 8 to 5. You have to be transported and rendezvous with a lot of these assets a lot. And so, winter weather can certainly impede that as well. So it can really just kind of manifest itself in a variety of ways. And so it's something that we really need to keep in mind. Now, this is, for soybeans, our big window where we export is typically September through February, with a real concentration during the months of October, November, December. Now, what's happened with this trade dispute with China is that it's really deferred a lot of those shipments to China. Now, again, we'll see if we end up exporting to China the amount that's been advertised with this agreement, this 12 million metric tons. But exports are obviously picking up. They were at an absolute standstill, before that agreement. And so there's some catching up to do. So now this catching up will also coincide with what's typically less ideal weather conditions. And so obviously that's something to keep our eyes peeled for as we move forward.
This also affects folks on the front end of the supply chain in terms of co-ops and farmers getting on-farm storage to the place where it needs to go when they're selling. So, when you look at it from that perspective as well, are there any notes to make during the winter season that is notable in the transportation system?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that we've seen a real evolution for these last, you know, 20 years is the proliferation of on-farm storage, and then also expanding storage if you're a grain handling facility, allowing you to be able to market your have an expanded window of opportunity for marketing your soybeans, your grain, and that's proven to be a wise investment for a lot of farmers. Well, but the thing to take into consideration is that sometimes if you don't just simply move your product to the supply chain system right after harvest, then you're going to be needing to make these deliveries when weather is not as advantageous, and so that can certainly really complicate things. And we are seeing, it depends on the area of the country. We have had a significant expansion of storage, which means there's still storage available, but then there's other areas where it's getting more taxed. And there's been more of a routine for years of you harvest the soybeans or the grain, and then you just simply move it to, say, the Mississippi River or to a rail facility. And since the fact that our exports have been much more modest than normal, it has put some pressure on storage because farmers have had to resort to putting their crops into storage, including many who would normally prefer to move it straight into the market.
Mike, you may not know the exact number here, so this is kind of just spitballing a bit, but I'm curious on what level of efficiency reductions we see on a typical winter when it comes to transportation and some of the obstacles that can take place. Is it more or less than, heavy rains or, tornado seasons or derechos, et cetera, that we'll see in other seasons typically throughout the year? And if it is, do you have a general idea on what type of efficiency loss there is during winter?
Yeah, I mean, you can easily see, a unit train, for example. Say if you have, let's just look at severe cold temperatures having a negative impact on braking. You can easily go from a 7,000 foot long train, which is clearly over a mile long, down to 5,000 feet. So you can have that kind of decrease um, in efficiencies. Just that alone, even if there's no snow, no ice. Obviously, if you've got snowfall, then that's going to complicate things. So it's not unforeseen that typically a rail journey from say a state like western Minnesota or North Dakota, Northwest Iowa, going to the Pacific Northwest, that's typically a 5-day journey there, 5-day journey back. When all of a sudden you have significant winter weather like snow, like ice, that can easily add a day or more to that. So it can really clearly add up. Now, this is not the first rodeo for railroads and for grain shippers, so they kind of build in a lot of that. There is kind of an expectation that you'll have some uh, you know inconvenience and complications due to winter weather. But again, it's still it can still be a real challenge, and particularly if we're going to continue to try to, if we're going to get anywhere close to these 12 million metric tons that China's going to buy, that means there's going to have to be a lot of movement from the interior part of the country to these port regions. And again, that's happening during the winter weather. And obviously, it depends on how severe the winter is in the state of Iowa. During late November through thus far, we've had a more severe winter weather than we normally do. Will that continue? And that's there's a lot of uh, prognostication that says that that we'll have a more severe than normal winter. So we're obviously going to see if that does indeed happen. We're going to see some complications moving forward.
What are some of the preparations you make when you do note that there might be a more severe winter than usual? What are the conversations that go on and the uh, collaboration that is necessary for that preparation?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it can involve really trying to get some of that product, say from the interior part of the country, to maybe accelerate that delivery from the interior part of the country to an export terminal, let's say in the Pacific Northwest or the Mississippi Gulf. You don't, your ability to be nimble is limited because you're talking about significant volume of soybeans and grain. You're talking about trains that you just can't easily, or barges you can't just easily turn on a dime. But there are those kind of conversations that happened, is that, hey, do we need to really get this moved out of the system before the winter hits? Any opportunities to do that, it can certainly make a difference. Or if you're needing to you normally source your soybeans from one particular area that's going to have some severe winter weather. You might have to source it from option B that might be further south. It might involve a longer transportation journey to get there, maybe a bit more costly, but you are able to source the volumes of soybeans, of grain that you need for that export journey. So a lot of different ways to be able to address some of those inconveniences and challenges that can occur.
Mike, as kind of a wrap up here, as we do go through winter, what are things you feel folks on the farm or folks who engage in agribusiness, but not specifically transportation, should be aware of as we look at challenges that take place during this time of the year?
Yeah, it's just it's a very it's a there's significant amount of investment that has to go into this system. Yes, you take into consideration that you do have winter weather. These states are accustomed to it, but even then, there's you try to plan based on past experience, and you can still be off considerably. I just had a discussion with a state DOT, and they talked about they try to plan sufficiently for the amount of salt that they need for winter road application. This past year, the 2024-2025 winter, they bought way more than they ever needed. So they have a lot sitting in storage. And now, but already they're exhausting a lot of that right now with the number of snowfalls that we already have experienced. So you can be veterans, in transportation planning. You can be very well aware of the potential for winter weather, but even then, there can be a lot of surprises, and that can benefit you from a cost perspective, but also can penalize you. And certainly, the rail network is that way. The barge industry is that way. Grain shippers are that way as well. So you simply try to do your best, but it's inevitable that there will be some challenges that will occur.
Mike Steenhoek is the executive director for the Soy Transportation Coalition. Mike, thank you so much for your time today on Farm Your Daily.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks, David.
This is Farm Your Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Again, in order to continue to produce this type of local content, we would love to have you join our community, so please follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. You can also find me on social media at Geiger Reports. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again on Monday. Have a good weekend, everybody.